Hello, Pam. Welcome back to the African Diaspora News Channel. I am Wongel Zelalem. I'm here with Christopher Chambers, and he's the director of the movie Fire Within, right? I watched the movie actually, and it was really nice. I cried a couple of times, but it was interesting as an Ethiopian. I kind of felt their pain more, I would say. But I want you first to introduce it to our viewers and tell us a little bit about the film slash documentary, right?
Yes, it's a documentary film called The Fire Within, and it's a very powerful human rights story. It's a story about three women who are originally from Ethiopia, and they're survivors of torture from during the Third Red Terror era. And it's this extraordinary story of coincidence, but also courage. And it's a story about how when one of the women, Ejigayo Taye, moves to Atlanta, Georgia in 1989, she starts a job as a waitress in the Colony Square Hotel, which everybody in Atlanta knows this building. It's a very iconic building. And when she started working there, she met one of her co-workers, the dishwasher. And when he said hello, she recognized his voice. And it was the voice she had heard several years back in Addis Ababa while she was in the midst of being interrogated and tortured. It was the voice of the man who was in charge of her own torture a dozen years earlier. And from this moment of unbelievable coincidence began a journey where three women who are survivors, who came here as refugees and immigrants, began a journey to fight for justice without any way of knowing how, without any roadmap. And they made history as they fought and found a way to bring their own torturer to justice in America. And that's the story behind A Fire Within.
Yeah. What made you take this project?
Wow. I mean, that's a big question. That's sort of the question of, do you choose a project, or does a project somehow choose you in this strange sort of almost spiritual way? So I made another film before this called Aram Aram, and it was a small independent film, but we got very lucky that people connected with the film emotionally all over the world. So we toured America, Canada, all the way to Australia. And as you know, traveling globally is a very long process, and you spend a lot of time reading. So I was on my way back from Australia, and I was reading this article that was about a human rights case, a trial in human rights history in America. And it was about this story that involved three Ethiopian women crossing paths with the man who was their interrogator and torturer. And I said, this is extraordinary. I mean, what, is this real? Is this like some kind of movie? And so, I mean, I've never heard of this, and it's too unbelievable, this coincidence. So I went and I started looking up other articles, and I couldn't stop. And I said to myself, I said, well, this is a great story. It's an inspiring story. It's a story that no one I've met knows about. Why don't more people know about this? But it's not my story to tell, right? I'm not from this culture. I'm not from this generation. That's for someone from that culture, from inside that culture to tell. And then time went by. That was 2016. And then 2017, and I couldn't stop thinking about this story. It was just had a hold on me. So I said, you know what? I want to see this film. Maybe I'll reach out to the women and see if I can find them and see if they are interested in being part of a documentary film so that the world can know about what they accomplished and what they achieved. And that was the very first step in a 4-year journey toward making A Fire Within.
Yeah, I actually really love the fact that they're the ones telling their own stories. You know, usually as Africans, we complain, like our biggest complaint is somebody tells our story for us. And what I loved about this is I am seeing them talking about it. There's someone acting as if it's them, but it's their words. And I guess it hits different because of that reason. I felt like it was more real.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because we did interview many quote unquote Ethiopian history experts, African American, Caucasian, European, Western European, Eastern European, all these sort of intellectuals. And I was interviewing one of them, and all of a sudden I realized, I said, this isn't the movie. This isn't what we're doing here. This is not the story that we're telling. The women are going to tell us their story. That's the only way this is going to work. And really, as you know, there's no way, even if I studied for years and got a PhD, I could not understand the complexity and the depth of Ethiopian culture and history, especially as an American, where our sense of history is like 50 years ago is a long time. You know, it's like nothing by Ethiopian history. 300 years, American history is nothing compared to Ethiopian history. So what I did is when I spoke with the women about doing this project, which was actually a relationship that was built, a relationship of trust. I asked them, and I made a promise to them, but I also asked them something. I said, will you be a part of this film? Not will you be in the documentary, can I interview you and then I'll show you later, but I need you to be a part of the editing. Like when I do the editing, I will show you the cut before it's finished. And part of that was because I owe that to them, because they shared this extraordinary story, but also the most painful experiences in their entire lives with me on camera. And so I needed to make sure I did justice to that story and I didn't mess it up, because that would be a disaster, you know, to make a film and then to find out you did it wrong. And secondarily, because without their input, I couldn't do it accurately. There's no way. With my background, it's just impossible. So every step of the way, I tried to engage members of the Ethiopian community to help make this story richer and more accurate. So in Ethiopia, sorry, this is a long story, but it's a very large production for a small, low-budget documentary, because we were filming in America, Canada, and Ethiopia. So when we filmed in Addis Ababa, I have a producer who's Ethiopian, Wongel Zelalem. He's an amazing filmmaker. He's from the generation, approximately, of the women in this film. So he lived through, and his family survived and was torn apart by the Red Terror. So he came on board and he supported the story, and he led me through the maze of bureaucracy in Ethiopia, which is world-class, the most impressive bureaucracy I've ever encountered. And no American can unlock that, that's for sure. So that was something that there's no way with my American approach I would get anywhere in trying to navigate that. And then we filmed, we hired Ethiopian crew. All the crew actually was Ethiopian. All the actors were hired. They were drama students because we needed young actors. And Ermias was there whenever we did, for every scene. So if we had a scene involving an interrogation, where I did much research, but it still doesn't matter. He was there, and he himself had survived that. He'd been interrogated. He'd been tortured during that period as a young man. So he was there to say, this is actually how it happened. Like, Christopher, that's kind of close, but you weren't there, but I was there. So I'm going to make sure. And I said, Ermias, thank you. Now we're doing it right. So, and then in Los Angeles, where we shot sequences that people see in the film that took place in Atlanta, but because this was low budget, we couldn't afford to film in Atlanta. So I went to Atlanta and I shot some buildings. And then here in Los Angeles, we had to film all the scenes. So basically we made like 3 movies, including the interviews. And again, this is a very low budget film. So I reached out to Nikki Legese at the Little Ethiopia Cultural Center. And she's an amazing, amazing person. Her foundation is amazing. And she connected me with Elsa Ademe. And Elsa Ademe is originally from Ethiopia, younger generation. And she came on board to consult me and to become my casting director. And so we then reached out to the Ethiopian community to bring in actors, 50, at least I think about 50 actors from the Ethiopian community, the new generation who are Ethiopian American, all the way to 70s, late 70-year-olds, and the 60-year-old, 50-year-old generation. And we were able to film these important emotional moments with authenticity, not because I did my research, though I did my best and I did a lot of research, but because we had people from within the community there to say, this is the way it should be. This is the expression that would be real, and this is authentic. So personally, I'm very appreciative because the film is much richer because of all of these groups of the Ethiopian diaspora and Ethiopians in Addis being a part of this film. So I'm really, really appreciative.
Yeah, you kept saying it's low budget, but it didn't translate. It was good quality. I thought it was done very well. So I think you did a great job on that. And I like that people, Ethiopian, the diaspora community, and people that are in Ethiopia were part of this. That's, I guess, what made it real for me. It didn't feel, you see, when you see a movie about yourself and you're like, that's not true. I get that usually, or the accents, you're like, okay, that's not our accent. That's not right. So you get that usually when you watch something that somebody that don't know about you and your culture when they do it. So I was wondering why it felt like that, but I guess you just answered it. It's because Ethiopians were involved, heavily involved in the making of this film. Which did you travel to Ethiopia and see for yourself, or you mentioned his name? Sorry, say it again. He finalized everything there, and you took it from there. How did that work? Filming in Ethiopia and in Canada.
Oh yes. So I filmed in America before. I'm American. I filmed in Western Europe before. I filmed in Central America. I filmed in Canada before. But before this project, I had never been to sub-Saharan Africa. I'd been to North Africa, and I'd never been to Ethiopia. So when I went to, it was very complicated because I was supposed to go with my cinematographer, Dominique Martinez. She's a very talented director of photography and cinematographer. But when I was submitting for our visa for filming, it kept getting rejected because we kept filing and saying we're making a human rights documentary, and we kept getting our paperwork sent back and saying, no, you can't come in with your cameras to come in and comment on what's going on in the situation. So finally, I got some advice from another gentleman who's an Ethiopian, and he said, here's how you should rephrase your submission, your application for filming as a journalist there, a media permission. Finally, after several months, I was allowed to go in, but my crew wasn't available anymore because they had been waiting for so long. They had to take other jobs to move on. I can't pay them to wait. So they left the project, and then I went alone. And thank God for Ermias Waldiamlak. I mean, he's a real filmmaker. He's a producer and a director in his own right. So it was very generous of him to come on board as a producer of this film to guide me through this project. So without him, any sequences, we would have no archival footage, because every day in the morning, we would start every day in the morning after I have my buna, of course. We would then go to the Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation, state-owned media, which if I showed up as an American with an American mentality, I'm sure I would not have gotten access. But because Ermias understands the culture, he knows people, he introduced me to the right people. And then every morning for about 3 hours, we would go through the archives and looking at every tape we could find and asking for more tapes. Does this exist? Does this exist? Where's the rest of this tape? And I'm very grateful, because I'm sure it was very annoying for us to always be there. But they were welcoming, and we went through all the tapes to find the footage, which I know a lot of individuals from from that era, from the 70s, they know this footage. They were there, but they also know because they saw it on television or somewhere. But for a lot of Americans, this is the first time they're seeing this footage. And for a lot of Americans, especially the footage in the early 70s, what I found is a lot of Americans are surprised and delighted. They're connecting with Ethiopian culture in a way they never did before, because in the media, you get only 1 or 2 representations, as you know. Since I was a child, I never learned about the joy and the creativity of the 70s era, of the Ethiopic music, So for an American seeing, Hirut loved and Elizabeth, they love Star Trek, and Elizabeth's brother was Spock, and someone says, here in Los Angeles as a teenager, my nephew, he loves Star Trek, and all of a sudden he's connecting. And so that's my hope really with this project. I'm starting by talking about Ermias, but I'm ending by talking about the result of his work, is that by showing all this archival footage, to seeing the joy of their lives and what they loved about their childhoods, I hope it will connect people all over the world to their story.
Yeah, and Ermias did a great job. Also, the archives you talked about, I'm not in that age frame, so I didn't see those footages. It was the first time, so I was like, wow, they were cool back then. Like, that was my first time watching that. So it was interesting for me too.
Yeah.
So we talked about the torture. You know, this story is about this woman that went to the US and then faced their torture. So you were interviewing them, you were, you know, filming the torture scenes. How was it emotionally? Wasn't it emotionally tasking for you? Like, how did you go about it when it comes to that?
So this project is unlike anything I've ever done before. I spent 4 years of my life on this, but the beginning was probably the most important, and the end being the editing to make sure the film was right. The beginning was, so I tried to reach these women. I have no relationship with them. I looked, you know, tried to find them on the internet, which, as you know, Ethiopian names can be changed, you know, written in the American, in our alphabet, the alphabet we use here, sometimes different ways, different pronunciations, different ways.
We write it our own way.
Exactly. So then you have one person may have 3 different spellings, but it's the same person. Depending on, maybe somebody wasn't listening, or probably usually some American person wasn't listening, paying attention. So I tried to reach out to the women, and, you know, so if someone calls you at work out of the blue, who's from a total stranger, and says, I want to talk to you about the worst thing that ever happened in your life, and you're in the middle of, you're on your way to a meeting, how do you handle that? So I didn't connect with them. They didn't call me back. They didn't email me back. And finally, I spoke to one of the lawyers, because they're easy to find on the internet, because they're very well-known human rights and successful lawyers. And one of the lawyers said, come to Atlanta, meet me face to face, and then I'll decide if I think if I will give you their phone number. If I'll say that I think you have good intentions. So we met, and he studied me, and then began my relationship with each of the women. So I got a phone call from Hirut, and it was a 3-hour conversation. And we spoke for 3 hours, and we didn't talk about the film. We talked about anything but the film. And I realized she didn't want to talk about the film. She wanted to find out what kind of person I am. And she wasn't going to ask me what kind of person I was. She was going to talk about things and see how my mind works, and she would decide for herself. I mean, very, very wise. And this began a sequence of many long conversations. Also, you know, Ethiopian style. It's not a 5-minute conversation.
Even a hello for us takes 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
When we ask you how you are, we actually want to know genuinely.
Yeah, exactly. And also, why did you think that? You know, Americans, we don't generally go as deep, I don't think. I think it's a very different culture in that way. So that began the beginning of building a trust together. And then when we finally went to the interviews, then it was a partnership. So I said, today, this is what I'd like to talk about. You know, it doesn't always work that way, because a good interview is a conversation, like you're having a conversation with me. Like I'm no longer having an interview. I'm now having a conversation with an interesting conversation with someone. So that's how it would flow. But when we got to the phases of talking about that, what happened to them, which is very important to understand, because it also is important for other survivors of torture to know that they can talk about it too. So these women are their courage in talking about what they endured and what they survived will inspire a lot of people who haven't had a chance to talk about their trauma. And it was honestly the most difficult thing I've ever filmed emotionally, because I had begun a true relationship and they were not strangers. They're individuals that I really care about. So I knew that when we talk about this, it will bring them pain. But I also knew that they were as in charge and in control as I was. So I wasn't saying you have to answer this. I was saying we're going to talk about this together, like a hand in hand, you could say. But it was really important, and it was very, very difficult because it's heartbreaking what they endured, and it's heartbreaking the pain they have for other people. I mean, that's the part that really starts to make me very overwhelmed is how much they feel for other people who suffered. And that's really what surprised me, is that is the heaviest burden on them, is surviving when other people didn't in that era. So I respect them greatly.
And at a very young age. No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please.
Yeah, and at a very young age, they were 14, 15, 16, I believe. I
Yep.
can't even imagine. Those are kids. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we said in the documentary, you talk about the excitement of the revolution. We were teenagers, and because they weren't quite they weren't at the front of the revolution. They were the teenagers following the college students, I think, because the college students were more intellectually, advanced than a high school student. And you can, as I see that, same thing. When I was in high school and I started learning a little bit about politics and saying, oh, revolution. Yeah, revolution, change things, make the world better, right? You before you become jaded, before you begin to understand there's a power structure. And you can see their excitement to say, oh my God, there's something going on in the streets. Let's go. Let's be part of something new. They thought it was going to democracy. God willing, it will one day. So, all that matters for me is that every step of the way, I had to have someone from the Ethiopian community, including the women or other members of the diaspora, checking the work. Because again, I know that no matter how much research I do, it won't go deep enough because I wasn't there, and I'm not from the culture. So that was, even with the interrogation and torture, Ermias was there to say, this is what happened to me, so you should do it this way.
Okay. So yeah.
No, I was going to say it's an intricate chain to make a film where every piece has to link together emotionally, but also it has to have integrity. So you have to kind of serve these different pillars to say, is this correct? But also, is this emotionally going to connect so that our audience can go on a journey that's not just educational, but it's also emotional, so that they're taken on a journey with these women rather than sit down, I'm going to give you a lesson. I'm going to give you, healthy medicine. So it's a challenge.
Yeah. So you said it was really important for you to involve these Ethiopians, and I've seen, I believe Liaka Beda was the producer.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about that. Liaka Beda is a big deal in Ethiopia. She's a model. She's a wonderful person, and we love her. So tell us how it was.
I mean, she's what I say is she's the real deal. She's a person who is globally famous. She's history making as a supermodel. Then she's won an acting award at the Cannes Film Festival, the most prestigious acting festival on the planet. And then she started Lemlem. Before that, she was World Health Organization ambassador for maternal health and women's rights. So she's an activist. And then she starts Lemlem fashion label. And Lemlem fashion label is amazing because it's not just selling clothing, that also is inspired in style by her roots in Ethiopia, but the money that's generated from the sales don't go back to make her a billionaire. They go back to Africa, not to donate money, but to create training for women in Africa, to empower them, to become independent, to become self-sustaining. And that to me is just extraordinary. I think she's an extraordinary human being, because you could just say, I'm going to just be a model, be famous, and call me if you want me, I'll be on my yacht, and that's it. And she has had the most incredible career, which continues to this day as a supermodel, unbelievable. And so when we were making the film, I was able to find a way to connect with her and send her the work that we were doing. And she said, I think this is an important story. Let's talk. So we talked on the phone, and then we met up in New York City. And she basically looked at me and she said, you don't understand what you have here. She said, as an American, she said, you can't understand the power of this story. And so she said she wanted to come on board to support it. So that, I think for personal reasons, but I don't want to speak for her, she decided that she wanted to support. And by putting her name on this as our executive producer is a very meaningful, I think, for our project. And I'm very grateful for her putting her name on it. Hopefully we'll be together one day to have a discussion in person when we can get an audience together safely. And it's really a great honor to have her involved with our film.
Yeah. So my other question for you is, what if you had to choose? I feel like there's a lot of challenges with what you were doing, you know, filming different places, a different culture and everything, and understanding it. But what would be the main challenge that you have faced when making this documentary?
So I think sadly, my answer is a little bit boring, but it's the truth behind a lot of independent filmmaking. Is the hardest part is you have a boat that takes money to make, even if it's a low budget film. But when you're making independent film, it's a boat that has holes in it. So with this film, we ran out of money several times. And so this project, I had many people, such as one of my main editor, Jim Gilbane, who had to work without pay. I mean, they didn't have to; they chose to because they thought this story is important. And so he worked 6 months at one point because I couldn't pay him. And I said, "I understand if you quit." And he said, "No, like this story is the most important story I've ever worked on in my life." He said that. He said, "I'm going to keep working." So that really is a challenge when you're dealing with it, because it's not fair to say to somebody, it's fair to say it's low budget, I can't pay you a lot of money, but it's not fair to say I need you to give your heart and soul. We have to do this right. We have to do our best on this project. And it's very hard to do that if you run out of money. So that was really a heartbreaking experience, because sometimes we have organizations or individuals say that they would support the film financially, and then they didn't. And I'm not going to say any names because this happens to every filmmaker, and probably every nonprofit has this. It's very hard to raise money. And so that was honestly the biggest non-creative challenge. The biggest creative challenge was making sure to trying to tell a story that can communicate to different generations and different cultures. Because this story, I think, is so much bigger than this film. It's a story that can empower and inspire the next generation across the world, because it's a story about 3 individuals who come to a new country and have no power, no connections, right? They didn't go to Harvard University. Their grandfather wasn't a banker in New York City. Like a lot of, everybody who has power in America has money, right? And they come here as refugees, but they have courage and they have determination. And these 3 women who came here without power, they fought to make the world a better place, right? To bring justice upon a person who killed individuals and tortured individuals without even a trial. So to put a man like that, to get justice for one person like that, who's had many, many, many victims, is an extraordinary message that just 1 or 2 or 3 individuals can come here or anywhere in the world. And if they fight and if they believe in their mission for justice, they can make the world a better place. So that was the challenge, to say, I need to make a film that the women's generation will say, yes, you did justice to the story. But I also want every college student in America, in Canada, maybe even in Europe, maybe in Africa, to see this film, to see and to become inspired, to believe they can make a difference in the world. Because these women are proof that you can.
Yeah, they are. So your hope, I would like to ask what your hope is for the viewers. What is your hope that they take away, like, from this film?
Yeah, I mean, so we're about to have our very first public screening. So no one's seen it in the public before. So April 30th at the Atlanta Film Festival is our first public screening, which is very exciting. And it's the very beginning of us going from city to city. And then after COVID, we'll come back to theaters. And so, I mean, our mission has 3 parts. It's to educate, right? So when you educate about violence that happened in the past, it's not for the sake of reminding people that horrible things happen. It's so that we can learn and have transparency and say, no, this should not happen again. Never again. The more we learn about human rights violations, the more we learn about genocide, the more transparency it is, the more people hold up their phone when there's brutality, the quicker we'll get to a better world. I mean, it's a long journey, but it starts with people sharing the truth. So one, we have to educate people so that we can prevent atrocities happening again, so that we don't have something like the Red Terror happen again. In America, it could happen just as easily, for sure. We've seen this country get divided violently, and we have a lot of people have a lot of guns here. So any country can turn into this, can turn on its own people. And then we want to empower. So I read a study that said in America, in this decade, there are 1.5 million immigrants who are survivors of torture. 1.5 million. So with torture in the psychology, sometimes people feel shame, even though it's not their fault. It was done to them, but they feel shame about it. So that means the real number is probably more like 3 million or 5 million. So millions of people come from countries all over the world. This is the history of America, whether they're coming from Eastern Europe, which is where this happens as well. South America, this happens. Every continent, this happens to people. This has happened. And so I think the journey of these women can empower, I hope, that other survivors of torture to see a tale of resilience and strength of women who, when they saw their person who delivered these atrocities upon them, they fought for justice. There was a way. They didn't run away and hide because there was no way. They found a way. And I think that's very empowering for other survivors of torture and other human rights abuses. And then, as I said before, to inspire. I mean, I feel like this story, I should have known about this in college. Maybe in high school, maybe a little too young because it's complicated. Maybe late in high school, I should have been learning about this. This is to me, this is as important as George Washington. These are American heroes to me. This is the history of America, people coming, fleeing atrocity. And even if they don't have power here, if they fight to find a way, they can succeed in their battle for justice, or to make a better world, or to make a better life. And I'm an American filmmaker, so I can only see things my way, of course, right? Through this lens. But I know that everyone I know, except if you're Native American, you came here from another country. And when you came from another country, if you were part of that immigration wave, you were not treated well. And you had to fight and scrap from the bottom to try to make a life for your family. So that's why I think it's important that we inspire young adults and the future of human rights warriors, so that some kid who's 20 years old and thinks, oh, can I make a difference? They can see this film, learn this story, and say, yes, I can.
Yeah. They definitely are inspiring, all three of them. So as I said earlier, I enjoyed the film. I think everybody that was involved did a great job, and more power to the women that, were courageous enough to come out and speak about it. You can still see it in their eyes. They haven't forgotten. That's something they're still dealing with, So I loved the movie. Hopefully people will receive it well, and remind our viewers once more when and where they be able to watch this film.
Certainly. So it can be confusing following film festivals. So what we're doing is we're putting all our information on social media. So we're on Facebook at A Fire Within Doc, like documentary. So facebook.com/A Fire Within Doc, but also on Instagram at A Fire Within Doc, and Twitter, though we haven't been doing it very much, but we will, on Twitter at A Fire Within Doc. And April 30th, on Friday, is when we have our very first public screening. So we had our first film critic review came out in Atlanta, and it was extremely positive. They said it was one of the best films they've ever seen at Atlanta Film Festival. And again, I think you're right. I don't think it's because the film's so good. It's because the women speak their truth, and they have a beauty that comes from strength, and they're very strong. And to me, they're my inspiration to keep pushing this film. So If you support the message of this film, please follow us on Facebook. And then when we come to your city, which hopefully, God willing, when COVID's under control, we can connect and we can invite you and we can let you know when we are bringing it either online eventually or hopefully to a movie theater where we can all see the film and talk about it afterwards. Because I've been connected, it's been extremely emotional week because I've been connected now by individuals from the Ethiopian diaspora who are survivors of the Red Terror, whose story is the same and very similar to the women's. And they don't talk about it. As you know, I think that many of them don't talk about it to their own families. And now they're connecting with me saying they feel like they have a voice, which is very moving for me because obviously I'm not from their culture. So for me, I'm very honored if anyone connects with this film emotionally and in some way there's some meaning for them, therapeutic or inspirational. That gives me great hope that this film can do some good in the world. So please follow us on social media and we'll always post updates and we'll always try to make it as easy as possible to follow what we're doing.
Okay, and we'll put the link down below in the description so people can go and easily click on it to follow your Facebook page as well as Twitter. So thank you so much for coming here and explaining to us your journey and how it was made. It definitely helps, picture and put everything together, So thank you again, everyone. I'll see you